This is one that can be done very quickly, but I still wanted to cover the genres of theater because I think that it is a very important part of theater. After you finish this, you should be able to recognize the 5 dramatic forms in theater, and also I've added adaptation, and while I don't consider that a form of theater, it's happening a lot within our society, particularly toward the end of the 20th century going into the 21st century, so I felt like I had to add that one. And also I want you to understand the structure, the meanings, and the different types of theater that they exist and how those feelings are conveyed. Tragedy, comedy, tragicomedy, melodrama, farce, and adaptation. The first recognized dramatic form with a serious protagonist in a serious action with serious consequence is tragedy. And what makes it tragic is that the human decision is central to the tragic action. The very thing that took the protagonist to the top of their game or the top or the pinnacle of whatever they were working on is the very thing that brought them down. Commonly, tragedy is described as a play with an unhappy ending, but it's really more than that. Tragedy is the first great traumatic form in Western drama, and it makes a very strong statement about human fallibility. People are both vulnerable and invincible, as capable at abject defeat as they are this transcendent greatness. And so that's the great paradox of our humanity. Tragic heroes exercise free will. They pit themselves against overwhelming forces. They share in the triumphs in the face of defeat. Now, the trials of the hero give meaning to the pain and paradox of our humanity. Tragic realization is a recognition that follows the efforts of the hero, and it usually takes 2 directions. Despite the suffering, a world order has to exist and can't be violated, and people can learn from suffering, or that human acts are futile in an indifferent universe. In both cases, the hero's actions have to be celebrated. So that's the thing with tragic heroes. As we look at them, it's called hubris, and hubris means pride. And you know, pride can take you to the top, but pride is also one of those things that can bring you down as well. You know, it always comes back to Aristotle's book, The Poetics. It was the first to document the element of tragedy and the structure of tragedy. Remember the 6 elements of tragedy. And then what he defined tragedy as is an imitation of an action. And remember, his biggest thing is you should see the play. It should cause a catharsis in you during the play so that doesn't happen during your life. A comedy is a work whose issues are usually social and more mundane. They're not spiritual or moral. They have a protagonist that's involved in an action without deep consequences. Usually, human decision is limited. Comic characters are comic because they are locked into stereotypes, like the braggart father, or the smart child, or the intelligent servant. All of those things, those type of characters, the complaining wife, all of those type characters lend themselves to comedy. But the thing that makes comedy really funny is the fact that they can take real life actions and make us laugh at ourselves. That's really what makes comedy funny. You still have to have those elements of our life that we're looking or taking a comic view of. At the end of almost any comedy, the life force is ordinarily celebrated in a wedding or a dance or a banquet, like my big fat Greek wedding is very much like that. There's harmony and reconciliation of all of the opposing forces, young and old, people who didn't get along, the reasonable and unreasonable. And the social ceremonies allow us to see that good sense wins the day in a comedy. and that humanity endures and is flexible and it's reasonable. And we're looking at those social values, the people as social beings. And so it also, as I said, it ridicules antisocial and eccentric behavior, and it does call for a sanity and a reason. Always that big celebration at the end, because comedy usually ends happy. Now, I think that tragicomedy is life, actually. It's that work that mixes the elements of tragedy and comedy, often giving us a happy ending or sometimes not a happy ending. Or it is that play, and I have to bring movie into it, that just leaves you hanging. You really don't know what's going to happen with any of the characters. And it is our life because, good things happen to us and we're really happy, and then bad things happen to us, and it is about surviving and still continuing within that. I think that the first series of Matrix shows that, because even though Neo wins the first time, well, we know that there's going to be a to be continued, but there's still that sense that life is going to go on, and it's still going to have the happy and the sad moments. Now, this is a mixed dramatic form, and the two dramatic masks of comedy and tragedy? Well, this is the genre where there would be a third that would have the look of, huh? I really believe that. The reversals go from good to bad, bad to good, and they are serious plays that end not always happy, but at least they avoid the catastrophe. So this is a way to look at it, and there's two mixed forms. There's tragicomedy and there's melodrama. Melodrama is characterized by sensationalization and sentimentality, and also all the characters are black and white. I don't mean that literally, but I mean it's about good and evil. When you think about westerns, they're about good and evil. The good has to be rewarded and the evil has to be punished. There's some form of comic relief, but usually the melodrama progresses at the whim of the villain, and the hero is forced to endure episode after episode of trial and suffering. But suspense is imperative, and at the very end, a reversal happens, and good always wins. Always remember that in melodrama, good always wins. There isn't any kind of hangover, like an ominous hangover, always. Good triumphs over evil in melodrama, and this came probably starting in mid-19th century. Melodrama derives its name from the Greek word for music, melos. It's a combination of music and drama, which the spoken word is used against a musical background, and it's a music drama. And with that, it increases the emotions. Think about how music manipulates you when you're watching a movie. It's oversimplified. It has stock characters. The villain poses a threat, and the hero always escapes with a happy ending. Now, when we're looking at probably the late 19th century, then we're looking at 2 to 5 acts for melodrama. And probably, if we're looking at movies, we're looking at high special effects. One thing I did want to point out in drama is that the conflicts are external. In tragedy, the conflicts are internal. In tragicomedy, the conflicts are internal. There are those things that happen in you and some of the decisions that you make that affect your life in tragicomedy and in tragedy. What makes tragicomedy that mixed form is that sometimes things happen out of your control. But in melodrama, it is never your fault. Always a happy resolution. Characters are clearly defined, and you're manipulated by music. The last genre is farce. It's broad, slapstick, implausible plots like The Three Stooges, Dumb and Dumber. Don't like either one of those, but it really does show this broad slapstick humor. And the meaning of it is based on a French word means to stuff, indicating that farce is stuffed with these laugh-producing elements. We laugh when people trip and fall. They fall off the balcony, roll down the stairs, and then get up and walk. Ha ha ha, that's very funny. That's what farce is. It's exaggerated physical activities growing out of situations that usually are making commentary on social value. It's the fantasy world of violence without the harm and guilt. I think that's probably the one out of all these bullet points that really make the most sense to me with farce. It is based on French theater, and it's something that we still get a lot of pleasure out of watching. Adaptation. Now, this is where we take existing literature and turn it into a live stage production. A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Wicked, the book, was turned into Wicked the musical, and Stephen Schwartz wrote the music to that. Pygmalion was written by Bernard Shaw as a play, and then My Fair Lady turned into the musical. The Grapes of Wrath was a book by Steinbeck, and they turned it into a movie, and then they turned it into a play. Having Our Say, the Delaney Sisters, the first 100 years, just a small book that interviewed these two women that were 100 years old and talking about their lives, was turned into one of the most fabulous plays that I've ever seen. You know, The Wizard of Oz also was a book before it became a musical. So we keep turning to those works of literature to bring us into more ideas. Oh, look at the Harry Potter series. All of those books have now are turned into a movie. So we keep looking to our novel writers to give us more fodder for theater and for film. We are at the end of our presentation, and so this will hopefully help you understand some of the genres of theater, but remember that they all can overlap, and it's very fluid. But these are some of the main ones that we really make reference to today. So again, I'm so glad to have joined you for this lecture, and I hope that you have a great day or a great evening.